Councils of Real Estate, it is a distinct privilege to welcome you on this special presentation of 2021-2022 Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tomáš Skibor, Chair of the European CRE chapter and founder and executive director of 4CT in Prague, here in Prague. Top 10 is developed through broad discussion, voting, and debate among councillors, and is an essential resource to clients worldwide and the real estate industry at large. Today, we will share the very latest on how each issue is impacting all sectors of real estate in Europe and in North America. I would like to introduce Michel Briard, CRE 2021 Global Chair of the Councils of Real Estate and President and CEO of Busak Real Estate in Montreal, Canada, who will offer a few more thoughts about the Top 10 and the Councillors organization itself. Michel, please.
Thank you, Tomáš. First, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the European chapter for hosting this special event and to all of the authors of this year's Top 10 Issues. A few words on the councillors. The Councillors of Real Estate is a distinguished international group of accomplished leaders within the real estate landscape, solving the world's complex real estate challenges. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers, councillors practice in 21 countries and offer expertise in more than 50 real estate disciplines across all asset types and classes. Each has earned the prestigious CRE designation. The Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate is one of the councillors' signature initiatives. It's usually launched around the end of June of every year at the NARE conference. That's the National Association of Real Estate Editors. Following 4 to 5 months of exchange and research by the External Affairs Committee to identify, debate, and develop narratives on the current and emerging issues expected to have the most significant impact on real estate during the year. Now in its 10th year, so we're the 10th anniversary this year, the Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate represents the very essence of the compelling thought leadership for which the Councillors of Real Estate is known. To learn more about the organization, please visit cre.org. Also, we'd like to offer you a complimentary subscription to our peer-reviewed professional journal, Real Estate Issues, by visiting cre.org/publications with an S. Also, attendees will be muted during the course of this presentation, but you're encouraged to use the Q&A feature at the bottom should you wish to submit a question. This will, with the exception of our 12 European members participating in the discussion period, to have more of a European perspective to the issues that will be presented. Your participation is welcome, and we anticipate a healthy and revealing discussion in the second half of today's program. While the pandemic revealed vulnerabilities and increased risk and accelerated trends and changes already underway, some of them will remain permanently. It also presents opportunities for those willing to recognize them. These are some of the unifying themes you'll find on this year's Top 10 list. We are fortunate and honored to have most of the authors with us today. The authors of each of the narratives to present their respective issues. We'll use the I guess a David Letterman style to begin the countdown, starting from number 10, leading up to number 1. To begin the countdown from the respective authors of this year's narratives, please welcome Constantine Tino Karalagos, CRE, Clinical Assistant Professor at New York University and Principal at Leonidas Partners in Islip, New York. Welcome, Tino.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. As of the writing of the Top 10 capital markets, we're still experiencing that roller coaster ride that I referenced. And while volatility still exists, the amount of robustness in the capital markets keeps things moving. So there are some things that I want to highlight that maybe weren't as prevalent when I wrote the piece initially. One of the things that we are absolutely seeing is significantly more liquidity, particularly in the debt side of the capital markets. There are a lot more transactions. We've seen sales volume increase. So there is a lot of capital that is continuing to actively chase deals in the capital markets. One of the things that I would say is that while the amount of distress that was expected as a result of the pandemic and how far along we were in the cycle, the amount of distress really hasn't materialized. So a lot of capital is looking for a place to invest. So that's why I think we're seeing a lot of debt activity and also a lot of equity activity. But recently, some of the private equity funds have raised some of the largest amounts of capital for distressed funds. So there's still a view that there's going to be distress in the marketplace. One thing you can always expect about the capital markets is that when you think that you've appropriately sized the different probabilities of things occurring, when the market is like this, I think it's almost a daily revisit of how likely different scenarios will occur, because things are just changing so frequently. So a couple of things that I wanted to bring up that I think are also very much in focus right now. When you turn on the TV, one of the first things you hear about is supply chain challenges and inflation. Now, while those are going to also be addressed later on by some of my fellow counselors, I did want to bring up that those things are definitely very visible in the capital markets. We see material, construction material, labor, all being very much affected by the inflationary costs, as well as the impact of not being able to get materials quickly. So those are going to have an effect on construction. They're going to have an effect on renovations of properties. And when you think about the amount of focus that is on sustainability, which again will be addressed later on, the materials used to turn buildings or to build buildings that are sustainable also have supply chain and inflationary pressures. When we look at where inflation most recently was reported in the US, it was 5.4%, and we look at the treasury rate of 1.6% for a 10-year treasury, implied in that is that if you invest in treasuries, you're negative 3+% in terms of real interest rate. So the only way to make that up is by taking on a risk premium that's going to offset that and pay you a return. And those things can have implications down the road as far as expectations for investors on returns, cap rates, and then eventually other costs of capital. So those are things that I think are being more brought into focus as we go through the rest of 2021. The other thing that I think is also very important and probably not getting as much press time in the broader markets is at the end of this year, we're supposed to have that transition from LIBOR to another floating rate index. Right now, I think there's close to $400 trillion worth of cash and derivative securities tied to LIBOR. And when we start moving from LIBOR to various other indices, that could create some disruption in the capital markets with uncertainty about where what you're going to use as an index, and even if there's an arbitrage that exists between the various indices. So that is something that I think we have to focus on, whether it's domestically in the US or globally, that between supply chain, inflation, and the implications of this index change, which is really a capital markets event, there could be some difficult to measure stresses that might appear. All of this is still in the face of uncertainty about working from home, the impact on retail and other pandemic related issues. So I would say, we were on the roller coaster before. Maybe there's some more turns, but we're still, I think, going to be on the roller coaster for a while. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Casey Conway to speak about issue number 9. Casey is the CRE and principal and co-founder of Red Shoes Economics out of Lilburn, Georgia. Casey, thank you.
Thank you, Tino. So maybe we just, that's a good transition. We need an adaptive reuse on LIBOR to a new indice. So as many of you know, and particularly in Europe, because you've been ahead of this next number 9 item, adaptive reuse, long before we were in North America and the United States. But adaptive reuse is not a new term or concept to the commercial real estate industry. It's an evolving property type whose use is expanding beyond more than just trying to fix the one-off assets. So many of us have seen, a particular blight item. It could be a train station, an historic asset. And that's where our focus has been. And that was really what I called and researched adaptive reuse 1.0. We're now at adaptive reuse 2.0, which is what we call the neighborhood approach. And this is looking beyond just a single assets to the whole neighborhood, because around these assets and in these neighborhoods, there's more than one asset that's probably in need of adaptive reuse, especially since COVID. And those assets are surrounded generally by very good, vital, densely developed out neighborhoods. So we're going to have challenges in the States, North America. We have all these suburban malls. We probably have 300 to 400 more to close. All of us around the world have, the equivalent of big box stores and dense retail districts. And when we're shifting from a shop and take home to an order online and deliver to me model, what do we do with all those? I think the adaptive reuse as a property type is coming into its own, and we need to look at it more broadly, from single assets to broader, looking at the entire neighborhood. A couple of other pressures that are underlying all this are things like housing affordability, transportation systems. How do we work with those? And if we have these great assets that are now not being utilized, how do we incorporate them into the broader neighborhood and think about how they interact? You may not want to have industrial right up against a residential area, but you may phase it, you may transition it. Kind of like how malls developed, they had a kind of a center core and everything built around it. Now we're reversing that trend in the neighborhood. We have great neighborhoods around. We have this, neighborhood of a mall or something like that now has to be considered into how its total interaction works. And so Tino talked about the effects of remote work as well. So housing affordability is one. How do we get it? Can these assets represent a way to bring housing affordability in? Workforce, if we're going more remote and we're not going into the urban areas, some may be well suited for office assets. We're seeing that in the United States with things like branch banks and even some big box retail going into that. The neighborhood approach really involves a re-examination of our suburban and our secondary communities. So it's gone from the urban area that had a piece of blight that needed to be fixed to now our secondary cities and whatnot. And if we don't address this, then the blight that came to the cities and urban areas on these assets, as we got rid of train stations in the U.S. and went to different forms of real estate and transportation networks, we're going to invite that blight right back into the suburbs. So this is an opportunity to get ahead of it. Some communities are ahead of the curve for the change that lies ahead. They're incorporating and thinking about things like driverless cars, different transportation networks. The counselors of real estate, to kind of wrap this up, identified adaptive reuse as a 2021 top 10 issue, not just because of the number of projects completed or underway, that in North America now, adaptive reuse surpasses self-storage as a property type, but we don't have it listed. We can't search on it or anything yet. But so it's come into its own as a property type. There are actually more than 50,000 adaptive reuse projects that have been done in the last decade in the United States. I track all those in about 40 states, and we're trying to expand that with partners outside of North America. But 50,000, that's more than all self-storage, because it holds a promise, one, of reconnecting our community. So what adaptive reuse does, instead of creating this barrier and blight, it's an opportunity to reconnect. So in the United States, our interstate system divided us. And now we have an opportunity to basically, through green space and doing green belts, to basically reconnect our cities. And two, preventing blight that developed in our dense urban cities from following us out to the suburban areas in our secondary markets. Restoring much needed green space is as much a part of this adaptive reuse 2.0 story. So you've got to look for the opportunity to get that green space, because that's what reconnects it. And finally, adaptive reuse 2.0 and a neighborhood approach or adaptive reuse overall is good ESG. It's good environmental social governance. We're not tearing down a building, building new stuff with new concrete and the emissions that come from all of that and harvesting of more materials. So it's also very much integrated and tied in with ESG. And as we know, again, you in Europe, you have led the way on ESG that we're just trying to play catch up. So with that, to discuss our number 8 issue, I'll introduce you, Kelly, who's a CRE and an academic director at Fordham University's Real Estate Institute. And he's the principal of Kelly Real Estate Economics in New York. It's yours to talk about economic structural change, item number 8.
Hey, thanks, Casey, and thanks to Tino for getting us off to a great start. So, how do we assess the real potential of the economy for this kind of sustainable growth that we all wish? What numbers constitute true trends and therefore can be used for business planning purposes? And what numbers are merely adjustments from the very deep decline that we experienced when the pandemic struck? Is the better indicator gross domestic product, which has rebounded in the US to pre-pandemic levels, or is it employment, which is still 5 million jobs shy of its prior peak? Is inflation supply chain driven, or is it a function of the federal policies, both fiscal and monetary, that are pumping money into the economy? Will we get spending bills through Congress? And if so, what will they look like? Which behavioral changes made by US households during the pandemic, including working from home and expanded e-commerce, will they persist into mid-decade? Or will they be happily set aside when things feel normal again? And in all honesty, nobody knows. 2021 data suggests that similar uncertainty exists in Asia and in Europe. And at this point, it's safe to say that economic models, which are linear and purely quantitative, are of limited use in providing us decision-making guidance. And as such, the price of risk should be high, but it's not. Real estate certainly knows how debilitated property demand is. According to brokers like CBRE and Newmark Knight Frank, office net absorption in the first and the second quarters of this year was negative. And vacancy rose even more steeply than it did during the Great Recession. There's still more than 85 million square feet of office space in the construction pipeline. And so office owners are braced for more bad news later this year and into 2022. Retail was hammered long before COVID-19 struck, as the sector had been overstored throughout the 21st century and was threatened by e-commerce even prior to COVID coming as part of our pictures. PricewaterhouseCoopers pegs US hotel occupancy at about 62%, up from 2020 and its low in earlier 2021, but still below any year from 2013 to 2019. Hotel revenues are expected to stay at pre-2015 levels into next year. And even though real estate investors may reasonably expect some uptick in demand next year, the ability to anticipate when occupancy and rent will rise frustrates underwriting. Yet, cap rates have been pretty stable. Tino mentioned the need for risk premium for office, for retail, for hotels. Cap rates have barely budged. And for apartments and industrials, they've actually declined. That doesn't keep pricing at levels that reflect the risk that's in the economy. And so what will investors do? We're observing that many investors increase their focus on property management, retaining tenants, defending cash flows, and selectively seeking value-add properties amenable to active asset management. And that seems to be where our transaction activity is reflecting these changing structural issues. How can we be adaptive at the property level? The thinking is focus on what you can control, because macro level uncertainty is the governing headwind at the policy level during the structural problems in this economy. I stress that we are still in the midst of a disruption. A disruption is a nonlinear event, and all of our economic models are well adapted to linear forecasting. I hope we're not going to find ourselves in the future, but I fear that we are, echoing Alan Greenspan's article, Post-Global Financial Crisis, which he entitled, I Never Saw It Coming. And with those disturbing remarks, I'm going to ask Marilee Utter, CRE and President of City Venture Associates, and the 2021 Chair-elect of the Council of Real Estate, to talk about our next issue, political polarization.
Thank you, Hugh. There is nothing new about political polarization in America or around the globe, but it hasn't reached the extremes we're seeing in our lifetimes, and perhaps never before in the US. It's not our intent to pick sides in the discussion. It only exacerbates the division. Instead, we want to shed light on the pragmatic harm that the division, even more than any particular policy, does to society, the economy, and the real estate industry. In America, polls consistently show that Congress is far more divided on many issues than the public as a whole. This is a serious problem. The partisan conflicts in Congress are squandering our precious time and resources, especially as we struggle to emerge from the pandemic shutdowns and setbacks. Indeed, the energy and focus of our elected leadership has shifted to fights of power and control, rather than a civilized engagement on urgent needs of the country that we need right now. On many fronts, the real estate industry is seriously hurt by this policy paralysis. Take, for instance, infrastructure, both physical and social. Roads, ports, telecommunication networks, water, power systems, housing, education, healthcare. These are the basic systems that undergird the structure and success of any economy. All have fallen behind in the US right now and need investment. Deferring that investment has delayed and impaired our recovery. We can't afford that, nor can the rest of the planet. Slowdowns and setbacks in the US are generally magnified globally. Consider immigration. Strong economies and escalating numbers of climate and political refugees are creating enormous policy changes and political dissension for both Europe and North America. Without a sound regulation system, we're foregoing the many benefits migration can provide to the receiving country, to the migrants, and to the countries of origin. U.S. has an aging population and a traumatic labor shortage that are worse for the lack of a coherent approach and policy. The impacts to real estate are direct and pervasive. Manufacturing, distribution, construction, hospitality, healthcare, retailing, all rely on strong levels of immigrant workers to function, and all are suffering until there's relief. National Association of Home Builders has been very outspoken about how the broken immigration system has hamstrung the production of housing, delaying deliveries, and driving up prices. and of course the environment. Can there be a more existential issue for our planet than curtailing the impacts of climate change? Both North America and Europe had a horrendous summer of heat, rain, floods, fires, as did virtually every other continent. These natural disasters are just the showiest aspects of the incredible damage being done, and it's all accelerating at a rate far beyond our most dire projections. So the solutions require global collaboration, of course, but also they require bold and immediate action at every level of government. Without agreement on a national course of action, the real estate industry faces both loss of buildings and land from sea level rise, natural disasters, polluted air and water, destroyed ecosystems, and lost raw materials. Then there's the domino effect on insurance, finance, and labor markets. This is a stiff multiplier that directly threatens our industry. And so it is that we consider the present tribalism of American politics as a top issue for real estate now and in the foreseeable future. It hinders our productivity and therefore the nation's economic strength. And the real estate industry's well-being is a direct function of economic growth. These are hard problems, and we acknowledge there's a legitimately diverse range of political ideology. We welcome vigorous deliberation and debate, but the goal must be to identify the areas of overlap and common ground, the center of the Venn diagram that is broadly apparent to those beyond the Beltway, that allows action and moves the country forward. Today's citizens and representatives from both sides of the aisle are expressing concern for even the future of American democracy. The economy and the real estate industry would be far healthier if Congress could replace party line voting with a foundational American concept, politics defined as the great art of compromise. Now to introduce issue number 6, please welcome George Vallone, CRE, President of the Hoboken Brownstone Company in Jersey City, New Jersey.
There we go. I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
You're doing fine, George.
Yep,
Okay.
we can hear you, George.
So the affordable housing issue was one that I gravitated towards 2 years ago when I wrote the first article for the counselors in the top 10. And it's because I've been a builder, developer builder for 41 years. And our firm got involved, our construction company, looking for third-party work to smooth out our workflow, which previously had been for only our own projects. And as the company grew, we needed to pick up third-party work. So we got into the affordable housing game, working with for-profit developers and also faith-based groups, community groups, church groups. Built about 1,000 affordable homes all over New Jersey in their, our larger cities, Jersey City, Paterson, Trenton, the state. And, we learned that it's really it's a system of subsidies that are needed. Most of the projects we were able to do, we were able to get, or the group we were partnered with, because we were just their construction company partner. They would get free land, they would get expedited approvals, they would get discounts on building permits, and the sponsor of the project, whether it's a church or a community group, would be the ones that would vet the affordable, make sure that the buyers of these homes and the renters of these homes met the affordability guidelines. So they handled the marketing of the whole project. It's very clear that a home is a foundation upon which all other priorities rest. Science, data, common sense make the importance of stable homes clear. But federal funding has been neglected for decades. There's a huge imbalance between the amount of subsidies available to build affordable housing and the supply of those subsidies and the demand of those subsidies. So right now, we're sitting somewhere around 6.8 to 7 million new affordable homes are needed in the marketplace to address the needs at the lowest income levels. Interestingly, systemic racism has a lot to do with how we've gotten to where we are today. Single-family home building communities are traditionally, they were set up to exclude people, not just prejudice against race, but prejudice against income levels. Everybody wanted to have the same kind of people making approximately the same kind of money living in their neighborhoods. For example, Blacks represent 13% of the general population, but they're 40% of the people experiencing homelessness and 50% of people experiencing homelessness that have children. Same with Native Americans, dramatically unrepresented in the housing market. So the article I just authored talks a lot about hope and the future, and the Biden Build Back America plan could have a potential impact on moving the needle forward in a way that we haven't seen it done in generations. There's $90 billion proposed for rental assistance, $80 billion for repairing and preserving existing housing, $37 billion for new housing. And if that all hit, we probably could make up half the $7 million gap that's needed, which would be a huge improvement in the situation. Rents continue to go up, and vacancy rates in affordable housing projects are down in the 2 to 3% level, which shows the demand. Part of the problem with the affordable housing market is the market rate housing market, because if there's not enough market rate housing for people to upgrade to and vacate the affordable units that they lived in when they were just getting started, then they're kind of stuck there. And without that ability to upwardly migrate, people that start out in affordable housing, they start to get their careers going, they start to get established. Now they want to now they want to buy a market rate housing. There's just not enough of them there. There's 150 million homes in the United States, and there's about 5.25 million people looking for those homes right now. A year ago, there was 3.8 million. Now there's 5.2 million people looking to buy homes that can't buy them, can't find them. So why is there this housing shortage? Well, the high rate of household formation, the millennial generation, which is larger than the baby boomers, and they're now in their prime household forming years. There's 12.3 million new households that have been formed since 2012 and just 7 million new homes. So there's a gap of a little over 5 million new homes right there. Resales, there's a low supply of resales. To be sure, the 5.25 million shortage includes those houses that could end up being rented. But one reason for the problem is the historically low supply of even market rate homes for sale. There's very difficult to get zoning approvals. There's a lot of people that push back in a community once they've got their home. I call them the Lloyd pubs. The last one in pulls up the bridge. And so inventory issues are worse now than they've ever been. There's bidding wars going on for market rate housing all over the country right now. There's been supply chain disruptions. We all know about the lumber prices spiraling out of control with a 400% increase during the pandemic. It wasn't that there wasn't enough wood, but there wasn't enough labor to run the mills. So the prices went up 400%. They're back down now to about half that, but it's still much higher. We've got a labor shortage. There's 10 million job openings in the United States, 1.4 million more than the pool of workers who could take those jobs. So the labor shortages, material prices, all of that is adding up to an undersupply of market rate housing, which exacerbates the pressure on affordable housing because of that upward mobility factor. People can't move out. So what are some of the big builders are doing? I mean, D.R. Horton, one of the largest in the country, they've actually slowed their home sales now to align it with their production levels. They didn't want to have a huge backlog of homes that were purchased but not being built in time to deliver. Same with Ryan Home. They have a backlog of 19% year over year. So they're going to slow their production down. So all that being said, there is some hope on the horizon now. California and Oregon are passing laws to outlaw single-family homes. There's going to be a big fight over that. They actually passed the law, and now it's being challenged. So we'll see what, where California goes a lot of the country. And so if California is able to sustain that ban against single family housing, you're going to start to see more density, and you're going to start to see more supply of affordable housing and even market rate housing. So there's beginnings of things that are sounding good in terms of overcoming the NIMBY. It only can happen at the state level or even the national level. There's actually national legislation that's been introduced to create more density and to take affordable housing, the approval of affordable housing projects out of the local control. Because home rule is really a big problem when you talk about getting more affordable housing built. So I'll end it with that, and let me announce that our next speaker is going to be Warren Crawford. He is the Executive Vice President of Griffin Swinnerton, which is a focused practice on public-private partnerships, expert developers of social infrastructure, public facilities, renewable energy, and public benefits real estate development. So take it away, Corin.
Thank you very much, George. Fascinating topics, all of which in some way or another relate to this topic that I'm going to be speaking about, and which my colleague Scott and I wrote about for infrastructure. And so, in thinking about this particular topic, we all realize that infrastructure in general is so vast as a topic. It's this perennial issue that pops up in a lot of top 10 lists. So we really tried to focus in on new imperatives, what particularly occurs or is occurring in the current landscape that we find ourselves in, that's shaping infrastructure, that's really impacting it. And so when we think about the impacts of the pandemic, COVID-19, climate change, and heightened societal interest in social and economic equity, these are the underpinning factors that are defining these new imperatives for infrastructure investment in the future, sort of beyond the typical things that we think about when we think about infrastructure: roads, bridges, airports, ports, mass transit, or other traditional infrastructure needs. I really wanted to focus in, in listening to and synthesizing the top 10 issues, the two issues that really drill into this topic have to do with the structural changes that are occurring in the economy, as well as politics or society. And what are those structural changes, and what are the implications for real estate? That's sort of been a lot of the topic here. And I really liked the way in which the conversation along the implications for infrastructure, real estate, focused on adaptive and modernization, sort of those two issues at the property level. And the truth is, if we wanted to sum up these new imperatives for infrastructure, it would be those same principles, adaptation and modernization at the infrastructure level. And infrastructure broadly being defined by urban systems that support or provide a foundation for society and economy. And oftentimes these urban systems, which are infrastructure, stitch together the real estate property types that we are all commonly investing in and analyzing. And so infrastructure is a large topic right now, especially with the latest bipartisan draft proposal on Capitol Hill, and in Capitol Hill in the US here. And that would allocate $110 billion into new spending on some traditional types of infrastructure, roads and bridges. It also includes $65 billion in expanding access to broadband, something more in the emerging set of an infrastructure asset class, but certainly something well known, society writ large today. $48.5 billion on public transit, as well as other types of priorities. And that type of spending, the $1.2 trillion overall, is going to be spent over an 8-year period. So I think it should be a point that we focused on new imperatives, but overall, just broadly speaking, when we talk about infrastructure, we realize that it's a all hands on deck type of approach. We need investment in crumbling in existing traditional infrastructure systems, and we need investment in new types of infrastructure that more meet these kinds of structural challenges that we've generally been talking about, woven throughout the themes of all top 10 issues. But, just to kind of restate some of the, canonical data points within infrastructure that leads this understanding of why we need to be reinvesting and how we need to be thinking about how to reinvesting it. In, the American Society of Civil Engineers gives U.S. infrastructure score of C-. And we in the US are ranked 13th in the world by the World Economic Forum for infrastructure in terms of global competitiveness. We've got funding gaps that the Society of Civil Engineers estimates at about $2.6 trillion, and on an annual basis, I believe. And so, that is that's just a daunting infrastructure gap that we need to try to figure out how to solve. And I think the idea really is how we should be thinking about solving that in the future. And I think that these types of issues are very common in, sort of the, I guess the best word would be established economies, whether that be in the United States or Europe or other types of societies that certainly have had a long-term incumbent infrastructure. So clearly, as the pandemic eases, we see that there's a need for broadband. That's one of the new imperatives, I would say, because of the ways in which we've had to adapt, the ways that we work and the ways that we live. So broadband is something that we really focused on. The others have to do with this idea of adaptation. The disruption that we know is continuing to come. It's almost like disruption is this issue that is something that is predictable now. We just don't know when the disruption is going to occur, but that impacts infrastructure systems in general, right? We think about, reapplying and retargeting infrastructure design into more decentralized infrastructure like distributed renewable energy closer to the point of consumption as a means of rethinking what infrastructure networks and what infrastructure systems look like so that they can be more adaptive to these types of disruptions. From a real estate standpoint, the increase in last mile deliveries to homes and businesses really starts to talk about supply chain and, and all the different types of infrastructure asset classes or real estate product types that respond to more resilient supply chains, more perhaps redundant supply chains in different points, not just coastal, sort of a coastal, distribution model, but more inland or offshoring, as they call it. So we also think about how supply chains impacting industrial real estate and commercial real estate speaks to the need for greater optimization, automation, resilience, and transparency within our vital infrastructure systems. I spoke a little bit about electrification and renewable energy and how significant increases in investment are needed in our electric grid. And again, electrification in buildings as well. These are all these forward-thinking modernization types of strategies that are really rooted in making existing infrastructure systems better, more resilient to the types of issues that we're currently facing, and more equitable, especially in terms of how we, protect society and how we protect climate. And then lastly, the last piece that we talk about from a trend standpoint is just this rapid increase in electromobility and how that's a prime investment opportunity moving forward in transportation systems and in the building systems that support that type of new infrastructure. It will change how cities and neighborhoods adapt in terms of public transportation and other forms of mass transit, as well as at the individual property level and sort of vehicle ownership level. And real estate owners that get out in front of these types of challenges will reduce their costs of adaptation, and it'll be a profitable venture for asset owners that sort of generally understand the interplay between these changing infrastructure systems from an architectural standpoint, as well as an end-use technology standpoint, and how buildings adapt to that. So that's all I have. To move on to issue number 4, we're going to welcome back Casey Conway.
Great. Thank you, Corin. Great to be back. If you really think about it, infrastructure and logistics go hand in hand. Logistics doesn't work if you don't have infrastructure, and obviously the infrastructure isn't needed unless we have a demand on logistics. So we identified this year as the number 4 item, logistics, because it's what essentially is at the epicenter of making our economy work. So whether you're there in Europe where you move more people by rail, or in the United States where we move more by freight, we each have to do a little bit of job on both of those items. And these infrastructure projects cost a lot of money. What's in the headlines is all of our ports and all of the containers. In the United States, we get the daily reminder about the 60 to 70 container ships, anchored off the coast of LA and Long Beach on our west coast in California. And we're even starting to see some of that on the East Coast here, our East Coast ports like Savannah and in Charleston. So, but we need to think more broadly, as Corin was noting on infrastructure. We need to do the same on logistics. It's not just ports, but it's rail. It's also things like our utilities. Earlier this year, we had our main gas pipeline, the Colonial gas pipeline from the Gulf that supplies everything to the eastern United States and throughout the South. And it got held up by a cyber attack. And we didn't have that energy resource functioning for a week to 10 days. We've had it disrupted before through hurricanes. But what we need to think about in logistics is kind of like an airplane. We need to think about the redundancy. So you don't just have one set of hydraulics on an airplane, you have multiple sets of hydraulics. So if one goes out or one engine goes out or is affected, you have others to go. And so how logistics is functioning dramatically affects commercial real estate. So let's think about that. I mentioned back in adaptive use, we're essentially evolving from a shop and take home economy to an order online and take and deliver to me. So what that means is less dependence on physical stores, and we need a new type of big box. It's a warehouse big box. So I'm on a public industrial REIT known as Monmouth, one of their independent directors. And so we build a lot of the warehouses or are the landlords for the FedExes and Amazons and Home Depots of the world. And those entities, those boxes, as they build those new e-commerce fulfillment warehouses, they're trying to position them near the infrastructure. So where there is good logistics infrastructure, as Corin was covering, you'll see the logistics follow. That's where the warehouses go. That's where Amazon's going. That's where the Walmart stores are going. And these all connect to a port or to a rail in North America, the United States. And it's also driving where the factories go. So where we relocate new auto plants or EV automobile manufacturing facilities, they're following that logistics infrastructure. How is the port bone connected to the rail bone, to the highway bone, to the end neighborhood bone? And so what all this means is we're going to dramatically change the inventory model that we had in logistics that we adopted in the 1980s from the Japanese, which was just-in-time inventory. So don't have anything in warehouses, don't have any redundancy, just have it just in time, in containers and on rail cars, and everything will be great till you have a pandemic. And so I think what we're going to see in the transformation in commercial real estate, a lot more need for warehouse, a lot more need for redundancy for things like supply stock. Maybe we want to stock a little extra toilet paper or pharmaceuticals or protective equipment gear on the way. So that's one way that's going to change where things are located. Site selection is going to be turned upside down. Walmart is now the largest private employer in 21 of the 50 states in the United States. Think about that. The largest private employer is not Tesla. It's not an automobile company. It's not a tech company like Google or Microsoft. It's Walmart. Walmart is a technology and logistics company today. In the US, 90% of us live within 10 miles of a Walmart store. So they're going to have a different logistics model than, say, Amazon. Walmart's going to want you to come to the store and pick it up, and they'll do a very good job. And Amazon wants everybody, to get their stuff in a Mercedes minivan. So it's going to disrupt retail. It's going to disrupt warehouses. And the box is changing. The logistics box is changing. It needs more land. It's going to a 10-to-1 land to building ratio from a 4 to 5. The ceiling heights are getting bigger. The concrete floors are getting more sophisticated so they can have more robotic equipment like robotic forklifts. And the other thing that's going to change all this is look at the allocation of capital, how logistics is changing. What you was talking, and our first speaker was talking about on the Tino on capital. So the cap rates are compressing. So when I started my career 35 years ago, the only thing that got a 4% cap rate was a regional mall. The only thing that does not get a 4% cap rate today is a regional mall. It's industrial. And the capital allocations are going from, say, 25% in office and less than 15% industrial to a complete flip-flop. And the cap rates are going to continue to compress because these boxes are becoming more and more valuable, and it costs more and more to build them. So logistics is front and center. Think beyond the port. Think beyond containers. Think about rail. Think about that American Society with Civil Engineers every 4-year report that tells us on 17 categories how all our logistics categories are working. And the only thing that got a really passing grade, a B grade, was ports and rail. So lots of different models to come. How we utilize the real estate could be good opportunities for adaptive reuse in the equation here. So with that, and that ties nicely in with our previous on infrastructure, I'm going to introduce fellow colleague Edward from Prague to give us the real European view. Be nice to have someone from Europe talking to us. And so he's going to talk to us about ESG, environmental, social governance, and whether we're at the tipping point. So Edward, it's all yours.
Thank you, Casey. Good morning for you from America, and good afternoon from you, our audience who are from the Europe. So first of all, before I start with covering the ESG issue, I would like to thanks to Deb Cloutier, who was the lead for the ESG for this year. I supported her from the European perspective, and due to the health issues, she's not with us, and I wanted to wish her the speedy recovery. She is a great person in that. I can recommend you to speak with her if you have an opportunity. So environmental, social, and governance issue. Actually, taking into consideration what happened in the past years, you can see that this word became something like the new wave, but it's actually the evolution of the waves and the initiatives we saw in past. If you combine the green housing, if you combine with the social initiatives, and also the part of the certifications for the buildings, there is a part which is implemented into the ECG, which is now covered newly, or not say the newly, is covered by the government in some rules, which we can call in the Euro. We know the major ones is SFDR and EU taxonomy, which actually framed these words ECG, what is expected from the word, and it's actually a matter of the acceptance of the word that there is a climate change, there is a change of the society, new people coming from the millennials, and just taking over the responsibility of the world, and us, all the ones, are actually leaving the part of the responsibility for the vote, not meaning the responsibility, but taking an action and having a real vote for that. Just in the numbers, easily. You can see the SWIFT from the people and from the directors who accepted already the ECG like a 10, which is the hot topic for the following years. In 2019, I just read that down. McKinsey survey says that 57% of the CEOs responded that they believe ECG program will create long-term value. And 83% of them says that they expect ECG contribute more to the stakeholders' value, which is then important because then you see that there is a financing behind it. It's not only the whole like a wave and whole the initiative, which will be put forward through their, let's say, the fundament of that, but also the financing is following massively. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, thank you guys that are supporting us with your study. In 24th annual Global CEO survey found that 30% of the CEOs are concerned about the climate change threatening their organization, which is actually a growth to the previous year from 24%. A growing aspect, and ECG gonna be a be a puzzle of their future. And same you can say would be, well, from the financing point of view, in 2020, ECG funds more than doubled in new money intakes, capturing $51.1 billion US, and then you see that it's already topic. So what happened and what's going to happen in the near future? We know that the majority of the board is already working on their rules and on their strategies. Despite the fact it's set up in the European level, I will talk more about the European level. It's set up from the European government that we have the taxonomy and we have another rules which are upcoming. But you can see already that the market is reacted because it's a part of their nature that they try to do the best. And they accepted that if we are not doing anything with the ecology and social and governance, we will most probably not being on the or delivering to our childs the livable planet. So from the climate law request, the research says that we want to reach in Europe neutrality, like climate neutrality by 2050, and in the meantime, the target is, which is called Fit for 55, that we will reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. This is compared to the 1990 levels. This is a part which actually shows that we want to be 2030 somewhere that we can achieve the point of the climate neutrality 2050. And again, you can see that the European Union want to frame all the things into some rules, but the market already reacted, and this is what I wanted to show you, which was my discovery actually through the European talking with the others directors, that we already been in that move upfront to the regulations. Because, for instance, if you see, and this is what we were talking with EY, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Deloitte and others, that you can see that the majority of the banks is already working on their internal portfolio and loan rules. Upfront, they know everything about the taxonomy, meaning the exact rules which will be applied, because they know and they understand that the pressure from the society, pressure from the environment, responsible thinking, and these things, we'll just put them there. And having that already set up, that means that you can already see that as the financing already caused the things like green loans going to be cheaper than the others. There would be the pressure on the paying of the carbon allowances, either for the consumption of the buildings and others. So then you see that the market already thinking also the financing point of view, and that's something which will change the real estate very fast, because once you see the opportunity, that's we call it an ESG issue, but actually it's an ESG opportunity for all of us. Once we see the ESG as an opportunity to do the better world, then you can measure that. Once you measure that, then you will get into the position that you will be most probably lower financed, or your tenant as the whole chain, because either if you have a tenant, let's call it that's some company, doesn't matter what, they will have their report and they will try to do the best also from their point of view of the ECG, and the part of that would be a building where they sit. What's the result of the carbon footprint, etc., etc. So then all these things will be mixed very soon, and you can see that actually it's my experience that majority of the developers, investors, and others are already working on their strategies. So one thing which I can recommend to anyone, because I see this sometimes, do not over-promise what you can do. Think really wisely what the status is, where you are, what are the reasonable steps you do, and then follow that. Because at the end of the day, ECG gonna be a rule. ECG is definitely already a rule for the banks and others, and you will see that's something which will really being a tick point for the investor, tick point for the tenants, tick point also for you in the reporting for the financial authorities. I'm a little bit longer, so then I will pass the word to explain the issue number 2, to technology acceleration and innovation, and please welcome Noah Chase from the president of Chase & Company in Illinois, and Tom Sherfield, co-founder and principal of Intelligent Buildings in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thanks, Edward. Technology has always been on our top 10 list over the last 10 years in some form or another. It's included artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, drones, cybersecurity. This year it's different. It's not about the technology, it's about us. These technologies have all moved from new to simply the way we do things now. This year, the news is about that it's the way we all do things now. Lockdown-driven changes in our work, in the economy, in social structures, and in our personal behavior have pushed our reluctance aside, either by choice or by force. The acceleration and adoption of technology during the pandemic has impacted everything, and real estate is no exception. Real estate is where we do what we do. More and more technology is how we do what we do. So the question remains, what will stick? Real estate is long-lived and capital intense. Lasting impact requires that there be value created when we do something with technology. Mere response to the challenges of working at home, working away from the office, reaching customers who are doing the same is not enough to make permanent shifts. Value creation from adoption of technology and from creation of technology is going to come from one of three things, and Tom will elaborate on some of them. First, risk management. Can we reduce risk? Can we control new risk from all these new people and beginners using tech for the first time? Second, generating trust. How do we get people to have the same confidence in their decisions, in their colleagues, in their information than they had when they could see them in person? And last, increasing utilization. How can we do more with less? Less real estate, less systems, less assets. So, Tom, could you elaborate on this a bit?
Sure. I'm just going to touch on those three things real quickly and kick it back to you. But the first one in risk, cybersecurity is a huge issue. We see it in the headlines everywhere. But also I want to include not just traditional cybersecurity, but facility cybersecurity. So think about HVAC, elevator, lighting, parking, often the forgotten cybersecurity that manifests itself physically, not to mention the insurance gaps and issues there. Noah mentioned trust. This includes how safe or healthy our buildings are, not just for wellness, but public health, as we might all understand. We're seeing a lot more about indoor air quality, water safety, sanitation, and then finally, utilization. This largely addresses the hybrid work environment, but I want to just emphasize this is not just work from home. This is work from anywhere, and the dimension of time, when to work, when and where to work. So don't just think about home versus office and only return to office. Now, having said that, it is going to impact the office design and how that's supposed to function when folks are there, but also the gigantic issue of attraction and retention. So not just the real estate, but the whole hybrid work environment, we're seeing a whole lot of activity and attraction and retention. Noah?
So pandemic-driven uncertainty is fading, not because everything's better, but because we're now pretty certain that this is the way the world is in a lot of aspects. We are off the diving board and into the water. And so when we stop panicking, the decision drivers about technology, about facilities change from survival-based questions, how do I get something deployed quickly in the cloud so I can get my company up and running again before my competitors eat me alive, to questions driven by optimization, by inflection points, and by moments where change can happen. Big, expensive things don't happen just because they're cool or because they might save us money. They happen in moments where leases expire, where companies merge or are sold off, where you have to do something and you may as well do it right. So all of these decisions include an aspect of technology-based pandemic response. Some of the facility management things that Tom was talking about, but also the facilitation of getting the information in the room at the moment. It's here, it's the way we work now. Let's all get used to it. So to complete our top 10 countdown and introduce the #1 issue affecting real estate, please welcome back Tomáš Stibor, CRE.
Welcome again. First of all, I would say that I'm really glad and privileged that I had the second time the opportunity to participate on preparing top 10 issue. I would like also thank to my colleague Cassandra Francis, who cooperated with me with collecting and summarizing all the topics reflecting remote work and mobility. So, COVID-19 disruption really significantly impacted human behaviors in how and where we are, use the space. And that's, I think, the main message. We were on some trajectory of those changes, but the COVID as a global pandemic accelerate that topic extremely rapidly. Now, with an escalating return to the business as a normal, let's say, and work is beginning to return to offices, 32% on average as June 18, for example. Commercial properties nevertheless may need to be prepared for changes in demand. And that's another, what I would like to point, that we have to be prepared and that the things will permanently change. And the question is, how intensively, how deeply, but that process of acceleration in changes will follow. One of the greatest lessons we learned during the COVID is that the benefit of more flexible, easily adaptable and shareable spaces. And that's another, let's say, message which we have to keep. There were lots of debates in the past about the flexibility in use, about the variety of spaces, sharing of the spaces in residential, in commercial. But now, again, we were speeded up very dramatically and significantly. It is clear that remote working, the acceleration of internet retail and the demand for larger and more natural spaces and other pandemic era behaviors will remain, and we have to keep it in our minds that they will really remain. At least some of level which will impact land uses and locations, and it will have really impact not just to the buildings but to the cities, to the areas, to the agglomerations as a whole. We learn as an industry that flexibility and adaptability are really paramount goals in real estate markets that desire resiliency when we will be confronted by local or global disruptions in the future. As the recent rapid growth in virtual accessibility has made the world again smaller, we will soon learn the resultant changes in the movement of people and the impact on spaces they use and where they use them. One immediate effect of returning to the office, which we all over the globe are part of, is the immediate residual benefits to the restaurants, to the coffee shops, to the dry cleaners, and also to the landlords itself. So this is our first and immediate result of going back to the let's say, pre-COVID habits. Further, after years of current but variant trends towards urbanization, the pandemic universally caused a movement away from urban cores, particularly for those with higher incomes who could afford to move, but in the same moment for lower income individuals seeking lower cost of living, because partly with that process, we in all over parts of the world, we are recognizing very, very dramatic speed in increase of the residential prices, and one of the answers to that increase of prices is to move somewhere where the living costs are cheaper, and usually it is to go a bit more far from the economic centers. Most of these relocations remained within the original regions. That means that the people are just moving in some let's say corridors or zones, 84%, for example. And while some of them are returning, it is unknown as to the permanence of these movements or whether they represent true urban exodus. So that's something what we are not able to quantify yet, because we still are not able to understand those processes and count them with let's say serious results. Time will tell us to which population migration and space use behaviors will sustain, as all real estate sector will be watching closely and poised to react. But we have to keep in mind that many things in real estate business, which is let's say very traditional, or which was a very traditional business, will have much higher dynamic in changes that ever happened in the past. Property owners and managers should be flexible in order to accommodate these demand-driven changes in the desired use and location of space. And that's the main message, that something so stable as a real estate will have higher dynamic in future, and we have to keep it. All who participate on the real estate markets, we have to keep it in our minds. And maybe this is the reason why the counselors of real estate believe remote work and mobility merits the #1 in slot on the 2021-2022 top 10 issues affecting the real estate, because this is maybe the top issue which will, and as my colleagues who spoke before me, they many times mentioned that the remote work and that the movement of the people are affecting every other issues we have been talking today about. And that's all for that moment from my side, and I'm passing it to my colleague Michel Coutiard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomas. Geez, we won't have much time. At the same time, the Q&A feature is pretty empty. I think people were just listening in, and the presentation were so well done and so complete, and also their summaries or narratives that I actually encourage you to, if you haven't read the narratives themselves, you can get the detailed narratives of each issues that's being published. Actually, it was published on our journal, the Real Estate Issues. So you just call the topic and you'll get the article. Again, on the screen, you have the list from #1 to #10. There's no ranking in the sense that you can see how intertwined, interrelated those topics are, common themes to each one of them. We talked of adaptability, flexibility, again, we were fortunate to have the authors themselves presenting the issues for 21-22 top 10 issues affecting real estate. I'd just like to, maybe I'll start with a question here. And again, it's going to probably resonate with the infrastructure, obviously, ESG, and especially Casey's 2 points, Casey Conway's on adaptive reuse and the logistics. And we talked, Corin, of the conventional investment that's needed just for the upkeep of the current or the normal infrastructure that we're used to think of. But now we're talking about new imperatives that are actually pushed forward and that needs to be as well, need major investments. Yet the US invests, and that's including Canada, North America, we invest less than 1.5% of our GDP in infrastructure. And that will probably still include what we need for those new imperatives. And then in Europe, you're looking at more in average between 4 to 5%, and in China, over 8%. What are your views on that? I mean, I'm actually asking Corin, but Casey, you might have also an opinion on this. Is this something that we'll see on as far as the US and maybe Canada? And I could probably respond. I know they want to increase their expenditure in the coming year, in 2022. We're going to be seeing in the budget beginning of the year in infrastructure. We're looking at a major expansion there. But you see this as increasing in a major way. I know there's that bill that's out there, but I think we need to really increase our expenditures when it comes to infrastructures.
I'll take a stab at it and certainly would love to hear what Casey has to say. I think that we look at one of the kind of unifying themes throughout many established and sort of established economies throughout the world is that government's fiscal challenges are pretty common throughout the world, especially especially when you look at established incumbent economies that traditionally are spending 1%, 1.5%, 2% of GDP on infrastructure. So I think that if we pass, and presumably I'm optimistic that this bill will get passed, it would be more of a one-time event rather than a shifting change for sort of these allocations of spending to match more of your emerging economies like you see in China or even some emerging economies in the African continent. So I honestly think that we are gonna, the way that 21st century infrastructure is going to evolve on a long-term basis, we'll get some nice benefit from an increase in spending in the short term from these bills that we're looking at. But I think that over the long term, the shift to 21st century infrastructure will be borne by more private sector involvement. You have this conversation of the Googles and Facebooks and Walmarts of the world are actually getting into sort of corporate infrastructure in some degree or another. They have to think beyond just what occurs in their buildings. They have to think about energy procurement, water procurement, how mobility works within their industries, because just these global companies are needing to get involved from an efficiency standpoint, and not only buildings, but also resources. So I think that you'll see greater levels of corporate involvement in infrastructure, and a lot of it will be targeted towards efficiency, doing more with less, rethinking what infrastructure is and the like.
So I'll give a little bit of a different view. So we all know we have needs for infrastructure and well beyond 1 or 2%. The question that we're battling in the United States right now is, what is the definition of infrastructure? Because what we've traditionally known, and in this Build Back Better piece of legislation that changes almost daily at the White House, about 20 to 25% of it deals with what we think of as hard infrastructure, ports and rail and roads and bridges. 75 to 80% is a new type of infrastructure. It's more entitlement or social engineering infrastructure. It's trying to get all those goodies and things in that we never have been able to maybe fully address. So there's a big question on how we can afford for it, how we can pay for it. In the United States, we can't afford a $3.5 or $5 trillion a bill, and we need to look at where are our priorities and how we're going to fund it. And Corin's right that many companies are taking this on. You look at Amazon, you look at Walmart, you look at the American Society with Civil Engineering report on our infrastructure. The two categories that got a B grade, everything else got a C, D, or F, was rail and ports. And those are semi-private public partnerships where the railroads and the states with the ports, they're a creature of economic development. They put capital in to make the ports deeper and to add infrastructure and modernize and logistics. So we can't just look at this burden on infrastructure on the federal government. We got to think how we're going to pay for it. We've got huge bills to pay after COVID. The Fed's expanded its balance sheet by printing money. So I'm very fearful about that nobody's really getting serious about the funding side. And I think that I believe in the public-private partnership, that a lot gets solved, whether it's toll roads, whether it's ports and railroads and how we do all those things. So I'm in the camp, a little bit more of let's let capitalism try to come to the table and work a little bit. And but we're not going to be able to solve everything that we need, and we got to put priorities on those. And I'm just worried about the funding mechanism.
Thank you, Casey. Do we have Ralph, or I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wouldn't mind to have a bit of a European perspective on either that question itself or any other topic that was actually covered today. Are there any comments?
I think all topics are very interesting and important in Europe and in Germany. And I would bring it in probably in a different order. At the moment, what we are discussing is a conversion of real estate properties into a new format, into new uses, because also under the perspective of ESG, it's better to convert property rather than to rebuild or to build a property new, because under climate perspective, it's always better to transform an existing property. This is one of the hot topic we are discussing about at the moment. Another important thing is that the prices are very, very high. We have cap rates for logistic of 3% or so. So the risk is definitely not priced in, and nobody knows where this could end. Another important thing is political compromises. I think it was the second position of the top of our top 10. And political compromises are necessary in a democracy as we have, but it's too slow. And we have huge challenges like infrastructure. We have to cope with all these expenses and all the costs. And it's not only infrastructure, we have also to cope with pandemic costs or climate change costs, etc. And at the moment, we are really about to discuss how we can cover this cost. It's about tax increase, or should we really think about new sources of how we can cover all these costs? And I think cost and expenses is most of the highest challenges we have at the moment.
Okay, Michel, maybe can I step in?
Sure, Thomas, go right ahead.
Because we are close to the with our time, and because we have let's say the last 4 minutes, and I would like to do some, let's say, closing remarks, or somehow I would like to summarize what happened today. Because as you all know, I mean my colleagues from CRE, that it was a premiere of such a cooperation, such a roundtable between Europe and North America. So at the beginning, I really would like to recognize those councillors who played also an active role in this year's compilation of the top 10, but they were not able to join us today, especially Deborah Coutier, chair of the External Affairs Committee, who developed the report, Cassandra Francis, my colleague and my partner in remote work and movement of the people, and especially Scott Muldevin, CRE Emeritus, who is the, let's say, the father of top 10, because he was the chair of CRE, and that was the first issue was completed through his chairmanship. And I also would like to thank all who participate our preparation of this roundtable, especially our colleagues here in Prague, in the studio in Prague, Kateřina, Zuzana, and Tomáš and his team here from the studio in Impact Hub. I really would like to thank everybody in Chicago who helped with the arrangement and with the technical support. And I think that we all, I believe, our audience today's audience will agree with me that we can continue with such a type of events, because we showed that we are ready to do such a complicated arrangement. And I really, on behalf of the Councils of Real Estate and its European chapter, I would like to thank for attending this special presentation of the Top 10 2021-2022 Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate. And last words from my side, or before I will say hello, I would like to give the space to you, Michel, to summarize and say some last sentences to you to say something from the other side of the ocean at the end.
Well, I think you said it all, Tomas, and I think yes, there's a lot of thank yous here, and again, recognizing our colleagues, our authors couldn't make to the presentation. You mentioned Scott Mulviven. There's obviously Cassandra Francis and Deborah Cloutier, or the chair of the External Affairs Committee. Again, the External Affairs Committee is responsible for creating, putting together the top 10 issues of every year. And this year, the chair was Deborah Cloutier. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us today. This is it. I mean, I had just a little comment, and I was curious, but in light a bit of what Mary Lee had prepared and presented, which is our polarization, political polarization. Sorry. Next week, there's an important event in Europe, which is the COP26. And I'm wondering, with that in mind, is anybody expecting any resistance to what can be discussed over there, especially from Europe, as to meeting again the targets, because they're going to be bringing this back, making the Paris Accord targets, and see what can be done. So I imagine the series of suggestions are going to be quite drastic, because we're running out of time. And I'm wondering if a few our European colleagues are expecting any resistance that way, or any major resistance as to what can happen during that conference.
Michelle, actually, everything can happen there. You know, that's politics behind also. But I would like to say, talking with our ministries and these people from the government, it's very simple. The move has been started, and despite the fact sometimes we do not see the end of the tunnel, or the results should be actually followed by the physics rules. The usual answer is that the science will find a way how to do that. So then, until they still keep that in their minds, which is actually happening in the Europe, we do not expect that they will just get out from that, because that's actually ideology, which is based on the trust that we can stop the change. And based on that, they will really push forward. There would be a particular agreement between if the nuclear is clear or not, nuclear power stations are clear or not. This is the particular part behind. But the wave has been started and it's working. This is what I expect from.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Any of our European colleagues would like to comment that? If not, we are on time, and I really look forward to seeing you again on our future CRE events, either virtually or I do believe soon in person, because we still have the idea to realize the international conference here in Prague, which was cancelled because of the first wave of the COVID, not realized because of the second wave of COVID, and we do believe that there won't be the third one strong enough, which will cancel it third time. So we do believe that we will have many other opportunities to meet in virtual meetings and debates arranged and organized by CRE, either from North America or from Europe. And I really very warmly believe that we will have the opportunity to meet in person in Prague next year, and in some place in North America too. So it was really my great honor and pleasure to arrange for all of you today's event. And for updates, please follow us on our website, cre.org, on our LinkedIn profile. So thank you to all who today participated, and see you soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.